maybe. Can you hear me? Okay, super. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As Bob said, move this down a little bit. My name is Kaya Henderson, and I am the Chancellor of DC Public Schools. And I'm here today primarily because Bob asked, and I would do anything in the world for Bob Beese and anything in the world for Georgetown University. And when I asked Bob, well, what would you like me to come and talk about? He said, just tell your story. Just tell your story, which is quite apropos because the very first course I think I had in the Executive Masters in Leadership Program was Janine's course and on communications. And the first book we had to read was a book called Tell Your Story, Change the World. And I truly believe in the transformative power of storytelling. Each of us leads very different and rich and complex lives, and by sharing who we are and what we do and what we're about, I think we do have the capacity to change the world. So I'm very informal. I'm just kind of regular. As I was walking in, somebody said, they're all here and they're excited to see you. And I'm like, really? I'm just kind of regular. So I'm just going to be regular and tell you my story. So I grew up in Mount Vernon, New York, which is a very little town just north of the Bronx, about 20 minutes outside of Manhattan. And I grew up in a family where I'm the only child of a single parent, an overachieving mother who went to college, was the first person in our family to go to college, and graduated in 3 years and became a teacher, and had me at the age of 22. And my grandmother stayed home so that my mother could continue her education and work. And we lived in the projects. In fact, my family lived in the projects for 47 years. And as I said, my mother was the first person to go to college. She ended up being the first person in our family to buy a house, moved us solidly out of poverty and into the middle class because she got a good public education. She didn't have the means. Her mother didn't have the knowledge to go to figure out which was the best school in the city, or to figure out when schools in the city were not good, what private school options she had. She had a public school system that served her incredibly well and literally changed our life outcomes. I traveled. My mother, because my mother was a teacher, she had every vacation off that I had off. And she made it a point that every vacation we went somewhere else. And so I traveled to Africa in elementary school, to Europe. My mother took advantage of the trips that were happening at her school as a chaperone, went to Romania at 10, Paris, Egypt, Spain, Rome, all over the place, because my mother felt it was really, really important to expose me. We didn't have a lot of money, but she capitalized on the experiences that we were able to have, and so I got to see the entire world and know that I had opportunities far beyond Mount Vernon, New York, far beyond the people that I was around, and exercise that exposure throughout the course of my public education. I went to Mount Vernon Public Schools. In fact, I walked to a high-quality elementary school in my neighborhood. It was the 70s, and coming off of the civil rights movement, there was a huge move to put high-performing schools in low-income neighborhoods, magnet schools. And so, just 4 blocks from the projects that we lived in, I went to Grimes Center for Creative Education, an arts integrative, gifted and talented school. Except you didn't have to be gifted and talented to get in, right? You just went because it was the gifted and talented school and they were trying to attract lots of diverse people to come into this environment. And I had an amazing elementary school education with great teachers. We sang, we danced, we created sets, we did concerts. All of our curricular materials were around the arts, and I loved school every single day. I had peers who were wealthy, peers who were poor, peers who were white, black, Latino, Asian. It was truly a melting pot. It was the salad bowl of the 70s, and got a great education there. Went on to middle school, and there were no middle school options in Mount Vernon, New York. 2 middle schools, both of them pretty crappy. And as an educator, my mother was like, not having it, not going to the middle school. And so, because she had options, I went to an all-girls private school, all-girls Catholic school, in fact, the Ursuline School in New Rochelle, which meant that somebody had to take me to the next town every day and pick me up after school. We had the luxury to do that. My grandmother was able to be off work and support me that way. We had to pay tuition. We had the luxury to do that because my mother was a teacher, and in fact, by this point, my mother had become a principal at the age of 29, overachiever. And, you know, even though she was running a school and doing all of the things that principals do, we had family support who could make sure I got to my private school and participate in all of the activities and whatnot. And it was fabulous. And at the end of my 8th grade experience, and it was time for me to go to high school, my mother made the radical move of putting me back in Mount Vernon public schools. Why? Because we had a great high school in Mount Vernon, a national award-winning blue ribbon high school. 3,300 kids, the only high school in town. But my mother's rationale was, at a small all-girls school with 600 girls, there were this many opportunities. At a large comprehensive high school with 3,300 kids, there were this many opportunities, including the opportunities to be with a different group of folks. And so I went back to Mount Vernon High School, where the overachiever that I was bred to be, I was the captain of the cheerleading squad. I was the president of the senior class. You name it, I did it. And graduated with enough smarts to get myself into a fancy place like Georgetown University, the only school that I wanted to go to. And I applied early admissions and got in and was thrilled as punch. Fast forward to 4 years after Georgetown, or at the end of my Georgetown career, trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. I came to Georgetown thinking that I would join the CIA. So here, it was very logical, let me tell you. I loved international relations. That's why I wanted to come to Georgetown. I was in the School of Foreign Service, and I felt like I wanted to serve my country. The CIA was exciting. There was, you know, espionage, and I was like, yes, that's what I want to do. Until I found out what the CIA really does. I was like, maybe not so much. And then I thought I would join the Foreign Service. And I got to meet lots of people who were in the Foreign Service who, with all due respect, maybe I just met a bad bunch, didn't seem like they were doing very exciting work. Seemed like they were sitting behind desks in other countries, and I was like, if I'm gonna sit behind a desk, I could do that here. And I was really trying to figure out, what is it that I wanted to do with my life? My mother, who had eaten dog food to send me to Georgetown, constantly reminded me, I spent $80,000 to send you to Georgetown University. What are you gonna do with this degree? And I was like, and I thought really hard about what I was passionate about. In fact, I asked myself 3 questions. The first question is, what do I like? What do I like? I love to travel. I love the international scene. I loved service, actually. When I was here at Georgetown, I served at So Others Might Eat. I was in the DC Ask program, with the After School Kids program, with adjudicated young people. I tutored, I mentored, I did all kinds of stuff. And what I started to figure out was not just any kind of service. I really enjoyed service to young people. I also like to sing. I was in the gospel choir. But just because you like something doesn't mean you're good at it, right? You don't ever want me to sing anywhere, unless I'm in a choir. And so in addition to what I like to do, I figured I should also be good at whatever I was going to do. And when I thought about what I was good at, I really was clear that I had some leadership skills. I had the ability to get people to do things. I like telling people what to do. I was the vice president of the NAACP when I was here, and I had actually led lots of things at Georgetown and in high school, and so I figured I was good at some leadership things. And the third question that I asked myself is, what difference does it make? Because I could do things that I'm good at, and I could do things that I like, but ultimately, I knew I wouldn't feel fulfilled if I wasn't doing something that also made a difference. Why? Because I grew up in a household where I was taught to whom much is given, much is required. And we have a responsibility to do something. There was mandatory community service in the Henderson household way before it became a graduation requirement. I was a candy striper. I would go to the nursing home on Saturdays because that was such a fun scene, and work with the elderly because that is what my family expected and demanded. And when I got to Georgetown, little did I know this whole men and women in service for others thing would like seep into my very soul and reinforce the things that I had been taught at home. And so came out feeling like I had an obligation to do something that also made a difference. And so when I put those things together, I thought to myself, I'm really interested in policy because you get to tell people what to do. And when I looked at the different policy areas, most of my friends were going abroad to Africa, to Asia, to South America to help fix, to help save, to help do things there. And I'm looking around and I'm thinking all of the things that you're going over there to do are issues that we're facing right here. And so I felt a little strange about applying to programs to go abroad to fix problems that I saw here. And I determined that I wanted to do something domestic. I wanted to do something in the policy arena. And the only policy area that felt right to me was education. Now, did I want to be an educator? No, never. Why would I want to do that? My mother was a teacher, and I watched her work late into the night, early into the morning, just like literally not just teaching, but like she's on the phone every night with parents. I'd wake up some nights in our house and there would be people there who didn't live with us, who needed a place to be for a while. We had more people living with us over the course of my lifetime than you could shake a stick at. And I was like, if this is what being a teacher is about, no thanks. I knew that she wasn't making a ton of cash, in fact, and I felt like, you paid $80,000 for me to go to Georgetown, right? I should be making a ton of cash somewhere. And, you know, I figured I needed to do better, different, more. And so I decided that I wanted to do education policy, and at some point I would have a job that was better, more, whatever. But nobody would listen to anything that I had to say unless I had been in a classroom, right? And so I said, how can I get into a classroom? I don't want to go get an education degree. That's not who I am or what I want to do. And along comes Teach for America, which at the time was 2 years old. And so I applied, and I got in, and I was slated to teach middle school Spanish in the South Bronx. And my mother said, okay, so what are you going to do? And I said, I am going to do Teach for America. And she said, teach a what? And I said, Teach for America. It's the urban core of young people who are going to teach in under-resourced urban and rural public schools. And you know what my mother said? What do you think she said? You think she said, woohoo, you're going to be a teacher? No. She said, I didn't spend $80,000 for you to go to Georgetown to be a teacher. If you wanted to be a teacher, you could have gone to SUNY this or CUNY that. Look, right? And she said, how are you going to reconcile this with your international relations degree? And I said, the teacher thing is just a stopover on the way to my more, better, richer thing. And she said, which is what? And I said, I'm going to be an international educational consultant. And she said, what is that? And I said, I'm going to go overseas, and I'm going to take best practices from schools and educational systems there and bring them back to schools and educational systems here. And she said, who's going to hire you to do that? And I said, I don't know, but I'm going to figure it out. And she said, figure it out. And so I joined Teach for America, much to my mother's chagrin. I taught in the South Bronx, and it literally changed my life. I taught 4 miles from where I grew up, yet it might as well have been on the other side of the world. My kids, for the most part, all African American and Latino, all incredibly poor, and none who had been beyond a 10-block radius of where they lived. We were in New York City, where at the time for $1.25, you go to the Statue of Liberty, the World Trade Center, the Empire State Building, Central Park, Yankee Stadium we could walk to from my school, and none of my kids had been there. Where had they been? On the stoop in front of their house. Why? Because their parents didn't have the time off to take them all over the world, or the resources to take them all over the world, or their parents didn't even know to take them all over the city, let alone all over the world. My kids were as smart and as bright and as energetic as any of the kids that I grew up with in Westchester County. But they were completely underexposed, and they didn't have anybody who was holding high standards for them, who was going into schools demanding the things that they should have gotten. And so literally, they were dying on the vine. I worked with teachers, some of whom were absolutely fabulous, but the majority of whom were completely disconnected from the young people that we served. They didn't live in a neighborhood. In fact, they lived in Westchester County in Connecticut and would come in every day to the South Bronx and leave. The kids had no connection to them. When I asked my young people, what do you want to be when you grow up? You know, you get the basketball player, football player, rapper, singer, dancer. And I was like, okay, but if you can't do all of that, give me a regular job. And you get a little police, firefighter, or whatever, but never a teacher. And I said to my kids, how come nobody wants to be a teacher? And they said, oh, we can't be a teacher, Miss Henderson. We're black, we're Latino. I was like, what am I? What is Miss Owens? What is Miss Morales? And they were like, they have to let a few of y'all in. I kid you not. And literally what occurred to me is for many of my young people, I was the first time that they had ever had a teacher of color. I was the first person who gave up my Saturdays to take them ice skating in Central Park, or who let them come to my room at lunchtime to plan their dance performances and to tweak their interests. There were no opportunities for my young people to connect. There were no places for them to go, nothing for them to do. And when they decided that on the garbage dump across the street from my middle school in the South Bronx, they were going to build a juvenile justice facility with a tunnel going underground to my school so that the young people could come to school, I had a crisis. I was like, what am I doing? What are we doing? What's going to happen to my young people? And I felt very alone, because I felt like the vast majority of teachers in my building weren't concerned the way I was concerned. And I remembered that I got into this because I wanted to change policy and affect things at a very large level. And at that point in my 24-year-old little brain, I felt like I needed an army of people to see what was going on and to help me with this challenge. And so I became a recruiter for Teach for America. I felt like the strategy lever that I could pull was to unleash as many smart college students on this problem as possible. If more folks like me and you were going into under-resourced urban and rural schools and seeing that my kids had the same potential that we had, but they were being totally left behind because their teachers weren't advocates. Their parents didn't know how to be advocates. In fact, many of their parents had had terrible experiences in the schoolhouse and were afraid or unable even to come and advocate appropriately for their children. I needed more soldiers. I needed more people like me who were angry that they were building a jail across the street from my school. I needed a bunch of folks. And so I spent a year on the road going to colleges and universities all across the country, telling people that they needed to do Teach for America. And a year after that, Wendy Kopp, the president of Teach for America, asked me to be the director of admissions at Teach for America. And so I was the national director of admissions, 25 or 26 years old, leading the largest team of people at Teach for America with the most important job, bringing great people. And it was there, I think, between my teaching career and my career recruiting, that I began to understand that you're only as good as the quality of your people. That if you have great teachers, it changes kids' life. If you have disaffected teachers, disengaged teachers, it doesn't. That if you are one person trying to fight a huge problem, that it doesn't really matter. If you have a team of talented, engaged folks who are all putting their energies at a problem, you can literally change the world. And so I worked really hard to figure out how to find the absolute best people to go into America's urban and rural public classrooms through Teach for America, for 3.5 years. I learned everything you could ever know about selection processes, how to interview people, what competencies you're looking for when you're looking for different types of people. And we honed and honed and honed Teach for America's selection models, training models, to try to ensure that we were only sending the best people to America's classrooms that needed them most. And then 3.5 years into that, Wendy asked me to come back to Washington, D.C. and to run Teach for America's D.C. office. And the D.C. office was a fledgling little office. There were about 25 teachers that we were putting in D.C. public schools every year. And my charge was, it's the nation's capital. It should be one of our flagship sites. I went down full of gusto, felt like, all right, we can do this. And I walked into D.C. public schools, Human Resources Office, and I said, I've got 25 great young people who have been trained this summer. They're ready to teach in your schools. And it was a small office. There were 2 ladies sitting in the office, and there were piles of folders all around the office that were literally almost up to the ceiling. And they said, who are you? And I said, I'm Kaya Henderson. I'm the executive director of Teach for America. Got these great young people. And they're like, nice to meet you. I was like, what are these towers? And they said, oh, these are all people who want to teach in DC public schools. I'm like, really? What a great problem. What's your selection model look like? What competencies are you looking for? What does the interview process look like? And they were like, what? I was like, well, how do people get from the pile to the classroom? And they were like, well, when a principal calls and says they need somebody, we just kind of thumb through and figure out. Now, I was like, wait, what? Okay, you're only as good as the people, great teachers, turn kids' lives around and all of this stuff, and you're telling me that you pull from a folder and what? Okay, well, I got these 25 teachers, and they were like, no thanks, we don't need them. And thus began my love affair with DC public schools. Literally, I'm telling you the truth. I was like, okay, I have good people, they don't want good people. They have people, they don't know if the people are good or not, but they want those people? This is a little crazy. And so I hit the pavement. I went out and I met principals all over the city, and I sold my core members one by one. I got a great young person. They've had some training in teaching, but they are very malleable. Would you be willing to hire them, mentor them, groom them, develop them? We'll support them at Teach for America, yada, yada. Got my 25 people placed. In November, when does school start? September. November, I get a call from those nice ladies at Human Resources. Hey, do you still have those 25 teachers around? No. Oh, we really needed them now. I said, actually, they're all teaching in your schools. And, you know, I remember thinking to myself, I'm putting bright lights into a very dark cave. And I could keep doing that, or I could try to figure out how to wire the cave. I continued to build relationships with principals. I continued to infiltrate DC public schools with Teach for America core members. By the time I left, 3.5 years later, we were placing about 100 core members in DC public schools, and I felt like a critical mass of folks could help turn the tide. In fact, I saw it at a number of schools where nothing was happening. I watched core members pull together and create opportunities for their kids that hadn't been created before. In fact, the only National Teacher of the Year that DCPS has ever seen, that DC has ever seen, was a Teach for America core member. And so I believed in the power of this organization, but I was also 8 years in to the cult, which I fondly describe it as, because it's a little bit of a cult, but there's nothing wrong with cults, cult-like cultures, sorry. There's nothing wrong with cult-like cultures. And in all fairness, I literally would not be who I am if it wasn't for Teach for America. Anywho, I was tired. I had been working really, really hard. The Teach for America had sucked up my 20s. I was getting 4 hours of sleep a night. It was a little crazy. I was bleary-eyed, and my boyfriend was like, yeah, I'm about to go. And I was like, okay, gotta get my life together. And my mother was like, when are you going to school? You need a master's degree, right? Because she's a traditional educator, and this is what you do. You follow the steps. Meanwhile, I hadn't followed any step that I was supposed to follow. That was not really working for her. You need a master's degree. When are you going to get a master's degree? And I was like, okay, maybe I'll go to school. That would be a good option to, like, you know, decompress a little bit, think, figure out what I'm going to do next. And when I thought about what I really wanted to do, I was perplexed. I was perplexed because I watched my schools in New York City and schools here in Washington, D.C. prioritize everything else except the quality of teachers in the classroom. Conversations about education were about curriculum and textbooks. They were about facilities. Here in D.C., they were about boilers and roofs. You couldn't open school on time because the boilers were broken and the roofs were broken. And people couldn't figure out how to fix them. But nobody was talking about the quality of the teacher in the classroom. And so I figured I would like to consult, because after burning up my 20s working, you know, 2 zillion hours a week, I felt like consulting was a very nice life pace. And I could determine my clients and determine my own schedule. And I decided that I wanted to consult to superintendents. I wanted to tell them that they needed to place teacher quality first. Teacher quality, principal quality, people quality. Because over my then probably 10 long years in education, that's what I had learned. And I figured I should go to school and find out what else is on a superintendent's plate that's getting away from them prioritizing people quality. And so I decided I should apply to the Urban Superintendent's Program at Harvard. Because if I went through that program, I would figure out what else superintendents deal with, help them rearrange those things, and put teacher quality first. And I got a call right before, as I was preparing my application materials, from a friend from Teach for America, 1992, when we started. And she said, I hear you're leaving Teach for America. And I said, yes. She said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to go to school and make my mother happy. She said, go to school for what? And I said, I'm applying to the Urban Superintendent's Program. She said, you want to be a superintendent? I said, no, I never want to be a superintendent. She says, well, why are you going to superintendent school? I said, well, I want to understand what is on a superintendent's plate because I want to consult with them and tell them how to prioritize teacher quality. And she said, I'm starting a consulting firm. We're going to consult to superintendents and tell them how to prioritize people quality. And I'll pay you $75,000, I'll pay you $25,000 more than what you're currently making. And I thought, consulting firm, raise, school, debt. I'll take consulting firm. And so helped a friend start a consulting firm called the New Teacher Project. Well, I'll tell you now, that friend was Michelle Rhee. And we started this consulting firm, and we worked with school districts all across the country to help improve how they recruited and retained high-quality teachers. We started alternative certification programs where mid-career professionals could enter into teaching in an effort to infuse some different kinds of quality into classrooms. We consulted to human resources departments to help them rethink their recruitment and selection models. We trained principals because honestly, in your principal preparation program, nobody tells you how to suss out talent. And so we developed trainings for principals to help them be thoughtful about who they were bringing in, how you create good teams, all of that stuff. And literally, my clients were all of the big public school districts across the country: New York City, Boston Public Schools, Memphis City Schools, Baltimore, DC, Oakland, Chicago, San Francisco, were all my clients. I'm flying in every week. I have a team of people there, and so I get to understand the inner workings of what's going on in these school districts. And I'm amazed at how inefficient they are. I'm amazed at how unfocused they are. I'm amazed at how off mission they are. I'm amazed at how the priorities of adults always take precedence over the priorities of kids. And I'm having another crisis moment, right? This is crazy. What are we going to do about this? And it was, I guess, our 7th year of doing this work, 7th or 8th year of doing this work, when Michelle gets a call saying, would you come interview to be the chancellor of DC Public Schools? New mayor, new energy around education, you know, we want to do something very different. And Joel Klein in New York had said if he got hit by a bus, the person he would call is Michelle Rhee. And so Adrian Fenty calls up Michelle Rhee and says, "Who are you? Will you come interview?" And I'll never forget it. It was a Sunday afternoon. I'm sitting at home watching television. I get a call from Michelle, and she says, "These crazy people want me to come and interview to be the chancellor at DC Public Schools." Now, I live here. I know these people. Sheer madness, right? And I'm thinking, okay, like, so what? Go interview, right? Like, it's not like you're going to do it or anything. You live in Colorado. You got kids. You and your husband are divorcing, and you just worked out your little custody settlement. And, like, yeah, like, just do it, right? Good experience. We'll learn what they're looking for in superintendents, and that will help us in our work at the New Teacher Project. And she said, "I need you to bite off your pinky." And I said, "This is not a bite off your pinky moment." Now, let me tell you a little bit about this tradition we have of biting off our pinky. Michelle says it's a Korean warrior, some kind of ancient Korean warrior thing, right? Where, when these warriors were making a serious blood oath, they would bite off their pinkies and sign their name in blood, right? And so whenever there was like a crisis moment at the New Teacher Project, or we had to like really make a hefty decision, it would be a bite off your pinky moment, right? If you're in, you're biting off your pinky. If not, And so Michelle says, before I go on this interview, I need you to bite off your pinky. And I was like, not a bite off your pinky moment. She's like, on the off chance that like somehow or another this spirals out of control, like I need to know you're with me. And I'm like, I'm with you, like, oh, we're good, right? A month later, 4 weeks later, literally, I am on my pre-scheduled vacation in the Caribbean with all of my friends. All of my friends are at the beach. I am in the house. I'm on a conference call from 9 to 12 talking about how we're going to transition out of the New Teacher Project, and on a call from 1 to 5 talking about how we're going to transition into DCPS, wondering how in the hell this happened. And that is what happened. Michelle, I think, was a candidate who the mayor decided was his bet for change in DC Public Schools. And as many of you know, DC Public Schools had been one of the lowest performing school districts in the country. In fact, 40 years ago, it was actually one of the highest performing school districts in the country. But as you look at the decline that happened in the city, so you looked at flight out of the city, as you looked at talent drain with, quite frankly, the advent of integration and opportunities opening up for women and minorities, you saw a real talent drain out of this city and out of the school system. The school system also became a jobs program, frankly, for the adults in town. To have a good government job at DC Public Schools was something that was coveted and protected. And we found ourselves at a point in 2007 when we came in where kids were failing miserably, where there was no accountability, no transparency, systems weren't in place, and we were charged to turn it around. And if you've been here for the last 5 years, you know that there was a whole lot of noise about the work that we've done. But the reason that I told Michelle, yes, we should absolutely do this, is because in our consulting work, we have been begging, prodding, demanding, challenging superintendents to prioritize people quality. In this role, we actually held all of the cards ourselves. We had the money, we had the power, we had the authority to show people what could happen in an urban public school system when you prioritize teacher quality. When you were able to recognize and reward your high performers and actually place them strategically to meet your mission. When you're able to use your resources appropriately to develop your struggling performers, to strengthen the weaknesses, and when you're able to, frankly, move out the people who can't perform. Except we didn't know who was who. We literally had no idea which teachers were good, which teachers were bad, because according to the evaluations, 98% of the teachers in DC Public Schools when we got here were exceeding expectations. But only 8% of our 8th graders could read at grade level. Disconnect. And so we knew that it was very important. I mean, we walked into school buildings And I'm telling you, I've been to school, classrooms all across this country. And I will tell you that I have never, ever, ever seen lower quality teaching than what I saw in DC public schools. Never. It wasn't because the classrooms were bursting or they didn't have materials or whatever. It was literally because the quality of the people in the classroom. Some of them, you know, in any bunch there are great people. In any bunch there are bad people. This was a disproportionately poor group of performers. And we knew that if we were going to turn the school district around, if we were going to change the outcomes for the kids in Washington, D.C., we needed to make sure that they had the best teachers in this country. And so we set about on a human capital agenda. We rethought how we were recruiting and selecting people. We completely rethought teacher evaluation and decided to design a system unlike any other in the country, where effectively we said, you can't be a good teacher if your students are not performing. The first place in the country to link teacher evaluation to student performance. In other places, you can't be a good baseball player if you don't have a good batting average, right? You can't be a star basketball player if you don't make baskets. But you could be a great teacher even though your kids are failing. Not anymore, not in Washington, D.C. In fact, we decided to change the rules so that principals could pick the best people for their team, not just the most senior people for their team. Revolutionary idea, made the unions go crazy. But it's the right thing to do. There's no way that I could tell you as a CEO of a company, turn this company around. Oh, and take Sue and John and Bob, who've actually been unsuccessful in other places, but I'm sure it'll work out for you. That's what we were telling our principals. And in fact, if you don't turn it around, we're going to fire you at the end of the year. I wouldn't take that job if I couldn't build my own team, if I couldn't control who was in my building and who's not in my building. And so we set out on an ambitious agenda. We also set out to change the environment so that we could attract and retain the best people. As you know, teachers don't make a ton of cash. In fact, in DC public schools, you could come as a starting teacher and make $43,000 a year. And if you stayed for 20 years and got your PhD, you could make $88,000 a year. Is that a value proposition that I could sell to a college student or a graduate student coming out, getting offers for $88,000 a year? And if I had $1 for every person who told me, I really wanted to be a teacher, I just couldn't afford it, we decided we'd change that calculation. And so we created a compensation system where teachers can now come in at $45,000 or $46,000 and make up to $120,000 over the course of 6 to 8 years, if you're good. In fact, our teachers can earn a bonus of $3,000 to $25,000 every year if they're highly effective, if they're knocking it out with their kids. And on top of the bonus, you can move 5 steps up the salary schedule in 1 year if you're highly effective time and time again. And so the economics around teaching has changed radically. In fact, we reversed the trend of being a teacher exporter. People used to come to DC public schools, learn how to teach, and then go to Montgomery County or Fairfax County where they could make more money and teach in a better environment. Now, I'm pulling teachers from Fairfax and Montgomery County. 1, because the salaries are higher, but 2, because they actually see a system that's on the move. In fact, over the last 5 years, we've seen the most tremendous growth that DCPS has ever seen in a 5-year period. Our test scores are up. Our enrollment, we were bleeding 2,000 kids a year. Our enrollment actually stabilized and even went up a year. Parents are voting with their feet, coming to our schools. We've modernized a number of our school buildings, and we've decided that we are going to create the model public urban school system in this country. Why shouldn't we? We owe it to the young people who are sitting in our seats. We owe it to the world. We are the capital of the free world, and we should have the very best urban public education system for the world to see. We will create that in DCPS. We're not New York City with 1 million kids. We're not LA with 800,000 kids. I don't know how to get my hands around all of that. But I got 47,000 kids in 123 schools. And if we can't fix this, we should be run out of town. If we can't fix this, we've reneged on a solemn promise to our young people. We owe them a good public education that is going to change the life chances that they're currently facing. Some of them are facing these life chances because we failed their parents. Some of them are facing these life chances because we failed their parents and their grandparents. And literally, we are losing generation upon generation of kids every single year that we don't get this right. I know this because I am one of those kids. Nobody thought that a little black girl from the projects could go to Georgetown University and ultimately become the chancellor of DC Public Schools. Nobody ever thought, including my mother, that at some point the European Union would call me and say, "You're a rock star in education in America. Would you come over and meet with education experts all over Europe and talk to them about the best practices that you're seeing in the United States so that we could use them in Europe?" International educational consultant. Yes. I was like, "Ma, got it, 80,000, you good?" So I say that to say I've been shaped by the experiences that I've had, by the transformative experiences of being a poor kid in a great school whose life trajectory was literally changed, by being in poor schools and watching what we offer to our young people, by being in organizations that have trained me well and helped me prioritize the right things. And now I have the opportunity to serve. It's not a job that I actually wanted, to be frank. I came as the deputy chancellor under Michelle. Our plan was to run DC Public Schools for 7 years. So we came in a year into Mayor Fenty's first term. We had 3 years left, and we figured we'd do a second Fenty term. Except, what happened? There wasn't a second Fenty term. At which point, Michelle made the decision that, she and the mayor were a package deal. And when he left, she needed to leave. Our plan prior to the Fenty non-election was that after we finished at DCPS, we go start another consulting firm. This time a for-profit consulting firm, because our first one was a non-profit consulting firm, because at some point I need to be richer, better, more, right? I need a retirement, I need to have some kids and take care of them and stuff. And so when she decided it was time to go, I was like, great, I'm gonna take 3 months off, I'm gonna travel a little bit, and then let's set up the next firm and make some cash. And she said, I think you need to stay. I was like, stay where? What? She's like, stay here at DC Public Schools. And I was like, and do what? She said, I think you need to be the chancellor. I was like, oh, you're crazy. No, no, thank you. That's very nice of you and all. But why would I ever want to do that? And she said, I just think somebody needs to stay here for consistency's sake. I said, I agree with you intellectually, right? I believe that I had lived in DC and worked in or with DC Public Schools for 14 years at that point. And Michelle was my 10th superintendent in those 14 years. And I watched the school system lurch hither and yon because each new superintendent undid everything that the previous superintendent did and did something else, and it just went back and forth. And I watched this system in chaos. And literally, I felt like, dang, this is a tragedy, right? Because finally, as contentious as it was and whatnot, people felt like we were on the right track, that we had finally turned the system around, pointed it in the right direction, and we're just getting ready to press go when Michelle decided to leave. And I felt that that was a tragedy. Not my tragedy, but a tragedy. And then I started getting calls. I got calls from teachers who I had recruited to come to DC Public Schools. I got calls from principals that I had stolen from other school districts, convinced them to come to DC Public Schools. I was hearing from my best central office staff, people who would never have come to work at a school district, who came because we were there, we were making the change that they wanted to see, and all of them were like, this was good, but we are out, gone. Can't survive somebody new coming in, don't know what the direction is going to be, sad about it because we kind of gave up everything to come to DC Public Schools and the dream is over. And literally, like, started to not be able to sleep. And then I started getting calls saying, but if you stay, we'll stay. And I thought about the fact that for 4 years, I had slaved to bring the best people into this school system, that I had slaved to try to change the culture of low expectations and incompetence that was DCPS, to create one of the leading school districts in the country in terms of growth, in terms of innovation. And when I thought about the little black and brown children like me who were finally getting good teaching and the right kind of exposure, now not getting that because one person blew an election, or because one person decided to leave, or because one person decided she wanted to go to the Caribbean and make a little money, I couldn't sleep, literally couldn't sleep. And so I decided that sometimes you got to make some personal sacrifices. Sometimes you got to do what you don't want to do because it's the right thing to do. And so I raised my hand and said, yes, I will be the chancellor of DC Public Schools. And what I will tell you is I wasn't expecting to have the best flipping job in this city. I get up every single day on fire about what we're doing for our young people. I get up and I work with people who believe exactly what I believe, that if we do our job right, we can show the world what poor children can do, what brown children can do, what white children can do, what Asian children can do. We can show the world the promise of an urban environment where you bring to bear all kinds of resources, like your differences, like your diversity, like the Smithsonian, like the White House. My kids get to do things that other kids don't get to do. Are there 950 other urban kids anywhere in this country who get to go to the White House Easter egg roll and see a president of the United States who looks just like them up close and personal? I have more resources than most people to do this job. I don't have all of the money in the world, but I have rich and diverse resources that if we do our jobs right, we can literally change the life outcomes of these young people. And so I'm on fire every single day to do it. It's not magic. There are tried and true ways to get this done. There are systems that you have to put in place. There are people that you have to prioritize. And if we do it right, which I believe we can, literally, I think we can change what people think about people, how people interact with people, and will unleash a cadre of folks on this world who are unlike anybody we've ever seen before, who have come from the very, very bottom and will go to the very, very top. That's the solemn promise that we've made to young people in DC Public Schools. And that is what we will deliver on. So every day, I'm excited. Every day, I get to talk to young people who look like me when I was little and who are learning and growing and being exposed and who will one day sit in these chairs just like you because they're as smart as you are. They're as talented as you are. They're as resourceful as you are. They have as much potential as you have, and they will change the world, but only if I do my job right. Thank you. So before, I was the chief negotiator on the teachers union contract with the Washington Teachers Union. And in fact, part of the reason why I was the negotiator was because I was the head of human capital, but more the reason I was the chief negotiator is because I had an established relationship with the union president and vice president. Remember, I was here before I came here, right? I worked in and with DCPS. In fact, when I was at the New Teacher Project, we had a contract to run all teacher recruitment for DC public schools. And so I was living in the Human Resources Department. I was dealing with labor issues around teacher hiring, and in fact, brokered a memorandum of understanding with the teachers union before I came in as the deputy chancellor to help improve hiring. And so I knew George and Nathan. We had worked really hard together to try to figure out how we could bring the best teachers to DCPS while at the same time preserving the best veterans. And, you know, we mixed it up, we worked late at night, but we came up with a memorandum of understanding. And so we had a history of working together. And when it came time to negotiate the union contract, we didn't just go to the negotiating table. In fact, in my capacity as the deputy chancellor, I had regular meetings with labor every month. I felt like it was important just to sit down with the unions and talk about the stuff that comes up every day instead of waiting until it became a grievance or an unfair labor practice. And so we had a history of just working together. In fact, when we had our first negotiating session, the interesting thing is I had never negotiated anything before, right? And the only negotiating experience that I had was 2 negotiating classes in the EML program, and the professor, it was Professor McCabe, I think, who said, you know, what do you mean your principals are in a union? That can't be. And I was like, welcome to the crazy world of school districts, right? So armed with my negotiating book, right, I go into this heavy, high-powered negotiation, and I decide, you know, since I don't know what the rules are, I can set my own rules, right? And so I said, here's what we're going to do. Let's start by going around and introducing ourselves. I'm on one side with my team, they're on the other side with their team. So then when you introduce yourself, say who you are, what you do, how long you've been in or with DC Public Schools, and tell about a student who's had a tremendous impact in your life. And so literally, we started with the teachers union folks, and you assume that they all have a student who was tremendous in their life because they're teachers. Well, when we got to my side of the room, and I talked about a student who had a tremendous impact on my life, and my teacher effectiveness guy, who was the National Teacher of the Year, talked about a student who had an impact on his life. And my lawyer, who previously had been a teacher, talked about the impact of a student on his life. And my HR person, who previously was a teacher. And literally, like, the union who had come in with their game face, right, melted. They hadn't realized that we were teachers too. They hadn't realized that we were there for the same reasons that they were there. Of course, we had different ways of how to get there, but that ultimately we were both there to figure out what was best for kids. And so we started our negotiation on a very different foot. In fact, we negotiated for 1.5 years and had tremendously positive interactions. We were putting some crazy stuff on the table that had never been placed on the table before. And what we understood was we needed to ensure that the union understood why we were asking for these things. Not just to bust their balls, but because actually we thought we could improve the quality of teachers, we could improve the experience of their members. And so we mixed it up, and we worked late at night, and we went to dinner together, and we went to each other's family events and parties. And we spent, at one point, you know, my boyfriend was like, George Parker or me, right? Like, who do you spend more time with? And I'm like, honestly, George Parker. But you build relationships with people. And to be frank, we had a 3-year negotiation. It could have been 1.5 years if the 2 sides had been left to do their thing. But the AFT National was so challenged by the kind of agreement that it looked like we were going to agree to, that they swooped in at the last minute, not last minute, because it ended up being an additional year, and became the epic battle of Randy versus Michelle. But on the ground, the people who were working through the contract had great relationships, had actually come to understand why we were able to put these things on the table and agree to them. And which is why when we took it to the rank and file of the union, after all of this vitriol between Randy and Michelle, 80% of the rank and file voted our contract in. So I say that to say, don't pay attention to everything that's happening up here. There's a lot of stuff that's happening on the ground that's healthy and positive and genuine and real. I think that unions have a significant place. They are a must-have in the work that we do. My grandmother was a shop steward of her union. I am pro-unionism. What I really believe is that our union's current setup is not conducive to what's best for kids. And so just like any organization, we have to help them figure out what they need to do to be more effective. We don't need to eliminate them. I don't want them to go away. They're important because left to our own devices, management will go crazy. And so we need the check and the balance. But good management labor relations happen because people build relationships. Promise every answer will not be that long. She just asked a juicy one.
Gentleman up there, the gentleman down there. Good morning, Dr. Franco. So you talked a little bit about the labor unions, but one of the problems that I see with public schools across America and why they're having a lot of problems is the teachers get tenure and then they're able to stay in their positions for a very long time, and if they're underperformers. Can you address this a little bit of basically teachers being performance-based? So teachers are one of the only professions out there where you can be a poor performer and keep your job because you have tenure. So how are you moving towards more of this performance-based and incentive-based type system, and being to capitalize on that question, being in DC, the teacher unions are able to lobby Congress and Senate a lot, and they do that very, very frequently. And being in DC, you're able to set the example to have that type of national impact. So I was just wondering what type of movement you are towards the performance-based system and impacting that nationally.
Not movement toward, we're here. We created a teacher evaluation system called Impact, where if you are rated ineffective, you are fired immediately. The end, do not pass go, do not collect $200. If you're a high performer, you get a bonus of anywhere from $3,000 to $25,000. In fact, every decision that we make now, we make based on the quality of the teacher. We've changed the culture in the district. Now that we have this information and we know who's a high performer and who's not a high performer, when teachers now are transferring from one school to another, a principal says, let me see your impact scores, because they only want effective and highly effective teachers. Previously, they had no idea about what they were getting. When we think about who teaches summer school, our kids who need it most, previously, you got your summer school assignment based on seniority, good, bad, or otherwise, when we really need our best teachers teaching summer school. And now we ensure that the only people hired for summer school are people who have positive evaluations. We've completely shifted the paradigm, and in fact, before Race to the Top asked for student achievement as part of teacher evaluation, before lots of people were still talking about it, we were doing it. And in fact, since we've implemented Impact, our evaluation system, there are over 13 or 14 states and school districts who have implemented, we call it Sons of Impact, a la Sons of Anarchy, don't tell anybody, systems similar to ours. They've borrowed heavily from ours and are eliminating tenure and seniority as the basis for decision making and replacing it with performance. We are a national model. And in fact, our unions at this point are on board with the simple fact that if they protect poor performers, their viability is even threatened. And so we've shifted the conversation here in Washington and all across the country. When you look at teacher evaluation and what's happening in the teacher evaluation movement, Impact, our system, is leading the pack.
The next one down here, yes. Yeah, so maybe it's about this impact system. Stephen Levitt's freaking out, talks about how Chicago public schools teachers compensated by standardized testing, figure out how to cheat
So first of all, let me just say on the impact front, what's fascinating is only 13% of my teachers are in tested grade levels and subject areas, 450 something out of 4,100 teachers, right? So the vast majority of my teachers don't have test scores. We evaluate them on other measures of student achievement. And so I want to make sure that you have proportionately the number of folks who we're talking about in terms of high-stakes standardized testing. But here's what I'll say about cheating, and God knows I've said a lot about cheating and we talk a lot about cheating. First of all, people are going to cheat. People are going to cheat. There's nothing you can do to prevent it. You can put all kinds of safeguards in place, but somebody is going to cheat. Ask the IRS, right? That being said, I actually think that only a small number of people find cheating as an obvious solution. The vast majority of my teachers are doing exactly what they are supposed to do, which is teaching kids. We have test security protocols that are in place. We have a hotline for people to call when they suspect anything improper, and we investigate every single allegation of cheating. We investigate it to the extent that we can. We turn it over to other people to investigate. And at the end of the day, we have either enough information to say, yes, something happened, and when that is the case, we move swiftly, fire people, move them out of the testing environment, whatever. But oftentimes, it's very hard to detect. And so you'll get an investigation that says something is inconclusive. If it's inconclusive, I can't say yes, you cheated, I can't say no, you cheated. And so out of an abundance of caution, I move you out of the testing environment so that you don't have the opportunity. In fact, it's the state's responsibility to come in and monitor where there are irregularities in the classrooms, in the testing protocols. And our state has flagged classrooms. There's been a tremendous controversy all across the country about what's the appropriate flag, what's the right statistical mean from which to derive the flag, and all of this stuff. You see what has happened in Atlanta. And I think that there are two things. There's a culture that either supports or does not support cheating. And I think in Atlanta, clearly, there was a culture that supported a lack of investigation and whatnot, because when you read about what happened in Atlanta, lots of people were raising their hand and calling and saying, something is wrong here. And nobody was investigating, which allowed the behavior to promulgate. So I think culture is important. And then there are actually the practices and the protocols that allow you to suss out cheating. And I think both have to be in place if you're going to prevent cheating. But I can't have the cheating conversation without also recognizing that when you look at the coverage of all of this cheating stuff, where are you reading about cheating happening? In Atlanta, in DC, in Baltimore. Did you read about the cheating scandal in Gwinnett County, suburban Atlanta? Mm-mm. Did you read about the cheating scandal in any suburban counties? Because there are lots of them going on. Mm-mm. So why is it that if this is a national problem, if high-stakes testing has bred all of these cheaters, are there only cheaters in urban environments? No. But that's all we hear about. And I think we have to have a conversation about what's really going on. There are a group of folks there are lots of groups of folks. There are groups of people who don't believe that urban kids can achieve at high levels. That's real. There are a bunch of people who don't believe that you should tie a teacher's evaluation to their student achievement scores. That's real. There are a bunch of people who think lots of things, and all of these things are swirling around this cheating conversation. My hope is that we can get to a point where we have a clear standard for investigating cheating, for flagging cheating, so that we can put these things to bed quickly. Because it's a hell of a thing to knock yourself out every day, to make huge gains for your kids, and to have somebody come to you and say the only way that could have happened was you cheated. It's a kick in the teeth to teachers who are doing a tremendous job, the vast majority of whom are doing a tremendous job. Do we have to figure out who is sullying their reputation and who is doing this bad? Absolutely. But do I want to drag every one of my teachers into, subpoena them, and make them testify under oath about administering a test every year? No. And we got to get to a point where we have a reasonable investigation protocol, a reasonable set of expectations around how we figure out who cheated and who didn't, and move on.
We'll start one and then across the week. Lastly, yeah.
Hi, so thank you for being here. I'm Chelsea Tucker. I've got a few friends who actually have come up through the TFA program and are now teaching in DC public schools. And it's really been amazing just to learn from them just over the past 5 or 6 years how things have changed. One thing I will say that I've noticed with all of my friends who are teaching now, which I have 3 close friends in the system, they are burnt out. And everything that you're saying regarding how important it is to get good people and retain them, the incentive structure changes that you've made are amazing. I mean, I'm just like soaking it up because this is impossible to be done. But in terms of the individual teachers, the young people who have options to go to consultants and do other things, how are you going to retain them?
So I think that money is only part of the equation. I have to create an environment where people can do their jobs well, not stroke out on me, and who want to stay. And I think there are a couple of things that go into creating that environment. One is valuing teachers, saying, great job, and we really appreciate the work that you're doing. And it was very important to me at the same time that we implemented impact, which for a lot of people was a shock to their system when 98% of the time you had been told that you were fabulous, and now all of a sudden a more rigorous evaluation comes in and says you suck. There's a little problem, right? But it was important to me at the same time to make sure that we said teachers were important to us. And so we created an event called a Standing Ovation for DC Teachers. It's the Kennedy Center Honors for teachers. In fact, the same guy who produces the Kennedy Center Honors produces this for us. And our highly effective teachers, there are about 700 of them, get invited to a black tie gala at the Kennedy Center. And we bring out the best people we can find: Secretary Arnie Duncan, Tom Friedman, The World is Flat, Coach John Thompson III, John Legend, Chuck Brown, Chrisette Michelle. We pull on everybody we know to come out and to tell these teachers that they are absolutely spectacular. We provide 7 awards of $10,000 and a weekend at the Marriott for our most outstanding teachers. There's a video like the Academy Awards which shows them in their classrooms doing what they do, because we want them to understand that we think that this is the most important job in the world and that we love them and we want to keep them. And in fact, many of our folks, many of our veteran folks have said, I've been teaching for 25 or 30 years, and nobody has ever said thank you in this way. I've never felt this special before. That's one thing. We got to create a culture where we're valuing our teachers. At the same time, we got to create a job that is actually doable on more than like 4 hours of sleep, right? And so when I became the chancellor, I went and I sat down and I talked to teachers. And I said, what can I do to make your job easier? And they said, well, you've been very clear about how you want us to teach with this evaluation system, but let's talk about what we are teaching, because I'm making it up, right? I don't have a standardized curriculum. My textbooks don't align with what the tests say. My principal says do this. My mentor says do that. The book says do this, that, and the other, and the test tests something completely different. Can you just tell me what I should be teaching? And what I'm teaching in Ward 3 is very different than what my colleagues are teaching in Ward 8. Can we have a standardized curriculum? And literally, if you ask any educator how long would it take to put a standardized curriculum in place across an entire district, they tell you years. And I went to my academic team and I said to them, look, we got about 6 months to pull together a curriculum, an academic plan, which lays out how we're going to standardize this, what people should be teaching. We called up the people who have designed the Common Core Standards, which is a new national set of standards, far more rigorous than the current standards that we operate under. And I said, look, can you help us design a curriculum that's in line with the Common Core that we can implement? And they said, yeah, sure, for like 2 years from now? And I'm like, no, for now. And we started in November. our teacher said to us, oh yeah, and don't give it to us in August when we come back. Give it to us in June so we have time over the summer to work through it. And I said, okay. And rode my team, you know, like the Kentucky Derby. And we produced, we came up with a 3-year academic plan, kindergarten through 12th grade, literacy this year, kindergarten through 3rd through 12th grade, we do K-2 math this year as well, 3rd through 12th grade math next year, and kindergarten through 12th grade writing next year across a bunch of different subject areas. And we delivered the entire literacy curriculum and K-12 math in June. Our teachers came to school this year on fire. They know what they're supposed to be teaching. They actually have not only what they're supposed to be teaching, when they're supposed to be teaching. We bought materials to support the plan. We actually have paced interim assessments that go along with the plan to tell you how your kids are doing over the course of the year and what you need to reteach. And finally, teachers are saying to me, I have what I need to be successful. How quickly can we get to math? So this May, we'll roll out math, and then next May, we'll roll out writing. And I think by having a standardized curriculum that your professional development is then anchored around, right, you actually can do this job in an easier way. In fact, because you're teaching the same thing as people across town, there are different opportunities for planning and sharing and working together in professional learning communities, right? There are opportunities for you to lead and step up and be a curriculum planner or a curriculum designer or a trainer and whatnot. And many of those opportunities were not available to teachers. And so I got to create an environment where these people want to come, see opportunities, stay, and where the job is manageable. DC Public Schools didn't get jacked up in 15 minutes, right? I can't fix it in 15 minutes. But what I do think I'm doing is layering on the right set of strategies that will build a place where people come and want to stay.
Right, it was right across from you. Yeah. Hi, I'm Gary. I thought your story of the transition after Michelle Reed really highlighted the importance of having a successor. And I wondered if your second step after taking that job was to start looking at who would replace you, so that you can continue even if you go on to consulting.
Yes. Yes. So the first thing that I will say is I'm not going anywhere. For as long as they'll have me, I'm going to stay because, as I said, I love this job. But I know for sure that on the off chance that I get hit by a bus, somebody needs to be able to step up. I have amassed an incredibly talented team. I feel like right now there are 3 different people on my team, any of whom could step up into my role.
Yes, the young woman right in the couple of yes.
Hi, your story is terrific. My name's Alex Quadrin, 13. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
I was wondering, with all the federal requirements, the county or district requirements around education, 90 minutes of that, you're a truancy officer, you're a social worker, what do you see as the largest barriers, legislative or otherwise?
I think the largest barrier, frankly, is a lack of creativity. Everybody has rules in everything that they do. The rules don't preclude you from doing whatever you think is best, how you implement them, what you do with them. People say all the time, the union contract holds us back from, look, we signed the union contract too. We agreed to it, right? So we failed to be creative in our interpretation of rules. We failed to maximize some of the things that the rules allow us to do. And I think we do things just because we've been doing things. We don't ever challenge the status quo. Half of what we've done in DC Public Schools over the last 5 years has been within the structure of the things that we're supposed to do, but just thinking more creatively about how to do that.
Down there and in the back with the glasses. Hi, Mike Henry, School of Public Health, class of 2001.
Woohoo!
It's interesting to see what's happened to schools over the last decade. It's been very encouraging to see all of that. Over the last 3 or 4 years, what do you think you've learned most from? What are some mistakes you might have, or Shelby might have made? And how would you take that knowledge and apply it to going forward?
Yeah. So I think when I think about what has happened at DC Public Schools, I think about let's see, how should I say this? Okay, so I think that when you are trying to do something radically different, right? I took a course here in my undergrad called The Cycle of Revolutions, right? And effectively what it says is all revolutions, every place in the world, follow the same cycle. There's dissatisfaction with the status quo that hits some kind of a peak moment that all hell breaks loose and it's a bloody battle in the street and, you know, people die and it's horrible and whatnot. And then people get tired of fighting, but they want to preserve the ideals of the revolution, right? And so they start to figure out how to nation build, how to rebuild their place, but instilling in their institutions the ideals of the revolution, and then peace comes, and then peace becomes the status quo again, and then there's another revolution and whatnot, right? And so when I think about what has happened in DC public schools over the last 5 years, I really think about a revolution that has happened. I feel like there was dissatisfaction with crappy DC public schools. At some point, the mayor got control and, you know, everybody kind of agreed citywide that we needed to do something radical. We brought in this reformer who broke a lot of China and did lots of things that people agreed with or disagreed with. And now people are tired of fighting. People are tired of seeing their, you know, friends and family dead in the street. They want the ideals of the revolution, but they want institutions and peace. And so I feel like to call things mistakes, maybe they were mistakes, but I think that they might have been necessary for the phase of the revolution that we're in. I'll give you an example. We closed 23 schools in 2008. We didn't engage the community at all. In fact, we moved very quickly. It was, I would say, a little community disengagement, right? And that's not how I roll personally, right? I actually feel like I sit down, let's have a meal together, let's figure out how we do this together. And what I thought was a mistake in terms of closing these 23 schools without real community engagement around it, and it was a mistake in the short term because everybody was up in arms and whatnot, but when I think about what that action enabled us to do in terms of the savings that we were able to immediately recoup as opposed to doing a 6-year plan, which is what the community wanted. What I was able to do with that savings, which is put an art, music, PE teacher, and a nurse in every single building the following year. And what I think has laid the foundation for my next round of school closings, which I personally will do differently because that's just my style. I actually think that some people would call closing schools without community engagement a mistake, but I've come to realize that it was the right thing to do for where we were in the phase of organizational development that we're in. So I don't think about mistakes. I think about why things happen, when they happen, and whether or not we can learn from them. I think that the biggest thing that we could have, should have done differently was to recognize that people don't want you to fix their problem. People want us to fix our problems. And I think that we didn't, over the last 4 years, make the appropriate case that the fixing wasn't this group of people at 1200 First Street, but required this entire group of people, this city, this community, these neighborhoods, that everybody had a role to play in reform. And I don't think we were good at enunciating and clarifying what other people's role in reform was because we were like, we got this, right? And the truth of the matter is we can't do this alone. We need everybody helping us. When we fail together. When we win together. It's not just the mayor's win or the chancellor's win. It's everybody's win. And I think that's something that we could have done very differently.
Back with the classes, you were next in queue.
Hi, Kimberly. Right. We had Robert Egger from DC Central Catering come in earlier during residency. And he spoke about the pilot program with DC Public Schools. Can you talk about what initiatives you have in mind for maybe expanding that program or other ways improving childhood nutrition in your school system?
Yep. So what a good news story. We, just like lots of other stuff, DC Public Schools was a laggard in terms of the quality of food and nutrition that we served to our students. We wasted zillions and zillions of dollars. We still waste zillions of dollars, but we're on the way out of that because we ran our own food service operation. And to be frank, one of the most important things that happened in 2007 when mayoral control took over the school system is we started to pull out competencies that were not the school system's core competency, like building buildings. We don't know how to build buildings. There are people who are experts at building buildings. Let's let them build buildings. And so we got the best people, the people who built the Jacob Javits Center and the Convention Center and the baseball stadium to now build our schools. We moved out facilities. We moved out security. We don't know anything about security. And we moved out food service to people who presumably know what they're doing around food service. And we had one mega contractor. It's always difficult to be nimble when you have one contractor, but we realized that we could carve out some space to do some pilot things because we were thinking creatively about food service. And so we entered into a pilot with DC Central Kitchen and a group called Revolution Foods. And we literally said, we're gonna significantly raise the nutritional standards. We brought in an expert chef to come in and help us rethink our menus. And we now have the highest breakfast participation rate of any school district in the country. In the country. We are 14th in the country for our supper participation rate. Our children are eating in droves when previously they were throwing things away. We had the chocolate milk wars, right? We eliminated chocolate milk because of the sugar in chocolate milk, and the kids screamed and the parents screamed. But guess what? People are drinking milk now. And we have nutritious options. My kids, we have two, a 15-year-old and a 6-year-old. And the first year of this food thing, literally, my 6-year-old would come home and eat franks and beans and a grilled cheese sandwich before dinner. I'm like, do you not eat at school? The food is nasty, right? 15-year-old would eat whatever we had for dinner for breakfast and then come home and eat a full meal also before dinner. I was like, hello, I can't afford this. School should be feeding them. And so we overhauled the menus. We put salad bars in our high schools and did all kinds of things around healthy eating. And our kids are loving food, eating healthier, and enjoying the food in droves. And so what we've decided to do is, as opposed to having one vendor, one mega vendor over all of our schools, we just put out an RFP to expand DC Central Kitchen, expand Revolution Foods, and to have 2 other similarly sized vendors of the same ilk so that we can actually have a portfolio approach to our schools and provide them with more options around healthy choices.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to end this magical moment, more moments, and let's just say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Senior Associate Dean.